Say the most important policy that they can pursue is the best interests of foreign citizens, not the people that elect them or pay their salaries or contribute out of their generosity for the prosperity of the nation, but foreigners who do nothing for the nation at all. Of course, we should care for them, but exactly what priority should they be? Number one, well, Matthew Littlefield says no. We're also going to talk about the absolute giant of this generation, and that is the life of Queen Elizabeth II, her accomplishments, her achievements, the value of the monarchy itself. What does it bring? What does it add to the world and to the average Australian's life? And will that be diminished at all by King Charles III, who is on the record as disagreeing with a lot of the things that fans of these channels that we're coming to you on today value? Things like climate realism, things like national sovereignty. Charles has been pretty vocal in his opposition to those things. Will he, as the monarch and sovereign to whom we swear our allegiance, be a problem for the future of Australia? All of these issues and more coming up in this episode of Pellowe Talk.
May all that you stand for and that we stand for be preserved under the providence of God for the happiness of mankind.
The trouble is caused by unthinking people who carelessly throw away ageless ideals as if they were old and outworn machinery.
But it is the values of individual liberty, equality before the law and the supremacy of people over the state to which we can always with confidence return as a powerful and uniting force.
Australia is not a secular country. It is a free country.
Well, as I said, I'm joined today by two of our regular panelists. Ellie Melly couldn't make it. So first of all, welcome to the former federal member for Dawson, George Christensen. It's fantastic
G'day.
to have you with us, George. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Dave. And yourself?
Likewise, fantastic, but getting better. And also in the studio, we have Matthew Littlefield. Matthew, welcome.
Hey, Dave. Good to see you. Good to see you, George.
Now, we've got this video queued up for you, Matthew. Tell me when you want it, or would you like to introduce your topic first, this government idea that foreigners could be more important than citizens?
Yeah, one of the things which I think is one of the worst trends in the modern world, one of the things that it's a big problem today, is the fact that there are many government officials of all different kinds who think it's their job to serve globalist interests, international interests, or foreign interests first before their citizens. And so we have a short little clip to give you an example of this. And this is from the Jimmy Dore show. So we're just going to play you a couple of minutes and you'll see what I'm talking about in this clip.
Okay, let's see how good I am at bringing this up without Chris here today. Okay. Here we go. Add to stream. Here we go. It's happening.
I'm joined today by the host of the Duran. From London, we have Alexander Mercurius, and from Athens, Greece, his co-host Alex Christophoro is with us. Gentlemen, welcome. Right now, this was kind of crazy. So here, this is the, what is her name? Her name is Annalena Baerbock, is the German politician of the Alliance 90, the Green Party, serving as Germany's Minister for Foreign Affairs since 2021. She was the Alliance 90, the Greens Party's candidate for Chancellor in the 21 federal election, making her the first such candidate for the Greens. After the election, the Greens joined a coalition led by the Social Democratic Party's Olaf Scholz, and Baerbock was sworn in as Germany's first female foreign minister on the 8th of December, 2021. And why is that? Well, listen to this.
But if I give the promise to people in Ukraine, we stand with you as long as you need us, then I want to deliver, no matter what my German voters think, but I want to deliver to the people of Ukraine. And this is why, for me, it's important to be always very frank and clear. And this means every measure I'm taking, I have to be clear that this holds on as long as Ukraine needs me. We are facing now a winter time where we will be challenged as democratic politicians. People will go on the street and say, we cannot pay our energy prices. And I will say, yes, I know, so we help you with social measures. But I don't want to say, okay, then we stop the sanctions against Russia. We will stand with Ukraine, and this means the sanction will stay also in wintertime, even if it gets really tough for politicians.
So what it seems to me is that she's putting, for some reason, the people of Ukraine ahead of the people of her own country. Now, that smells like corruption to me. And that smells like she's in the pocket of the military-industrial complex.
Matt, that's just insane.
It's insane, but it's also common. I mean, how many politicians today think that it's their job to serve? I mean, you heard what she said. No matter what my voters think, I want to stand with Ukraine. What the voters think is supposed to be the core of democracy. Of the people, ruled by the people. That's what democracy means. And yet she's saying, we don't care what you think. We don't, and she even acknowledges, oh yeah, it's going to get hard for our people and they're not going to be happy with us. And I don't know how much people are aware of what's happening in Europe right now, but their energy prices are skyrocketing because a large percentage of their heating in Europe is done from gas that comes from Russia. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Europe. Have you been to Europe?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you've been to Europe, have you been there in the winter time?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to stay warm. It's not like Australia.
It's freezing.
You can't just put a jumper on
Yeah.
and be okay, especially in Northern Europe, where it gets incredibly cold. It's not as cold as, say, the Northern United States, where it gets more extreme, but it gets to levels of cold, which are dangerous. Just like here in Australia, without air conditioning, it gets to levels of hot, which are dangerous for older people. And so what they're doing is they're actually driving, these sanctions are driving the European people down, and this is a German politician, and putting pressure on the German people. They're actually backfiring on the people. And I'm not here to discuss the war in Ukraine. What I'm here to discuss is this. What is her job as a politician? Her job as a politician is to serve her people and make sure that they're looked after as best she can. Now, there are things which are out of the power of a politician to be able to do, and we understand that. But it's not out of their power to stop trying to punish their own people to try and punish another country. And to say we don't care what the people think is, to me, an inversion of the tradition of democracy and completely undermines it.
Yeah. George, your opinion of this speech and reflections?
A couple of points. I mean, to take away from the substantive topic that Matt's talking about, but on the same issue, these sanctions against Russia have caused just absolute catastrophe throughout Europe. Switzerland, the other day, I'm reading, they have imposed sanctions on their own people now. If you raise the temperature of your household heater above 19 degrees, you can actually be jailed for it. You can be jailed for that. And the government of the day has launched this advertising campaign asking people to dob in their neighbour if they're overusing electricity. So that's a direct consequence of putting foreign interests above your own national internal interests. I got to say, we also do see this in Australia in a way. The Australian people, time and again, have rejected in many a poll or survey, have rejected the notion of huge immigration. They want to see immigration levels brought down to a steady, manageable level where we're not having pressure on infrastructure and pressure on services and all the rest of it. But here's the federal Labor government that, when it was in opposition, kept on attacking and rightfully complaining about the Liberal National Government's policies in regards to foreign workers. And the view was that foreign workers coming in displaces the Australian workforce. Foreign workers coming in negates the need or the onus on big companies to invest correctly in training, and more importantly, that the level of foreign workers coming into the country actually drives down wages. Now, there's been empirical studies done by academics about this, and it shows that it is the case, actually. And yet, here's this Labor government that, when in opposition, bemoaned all of this, and they hold the Jobs and Skills Summit. The multinational corporations turn up and tell them that we need more foreign workers, and Labor then acquiesces to that against the wishes not just of the Australian public, which is bad enough. That's the worst, right? But even of their own voting base, they go against their wishes on this and introduce the largest migration program that Australia has ever seen, the vast bulk of them, which will be guest workers in the country. So that's one thing. And I know just to the icing on this cake, David, is that there currently is a government-initiated joint standing committee inquiry into electoral matters occurring. And so it's looking into the 2022 election. And one of the things that the minister has actually, the Special Minister of State, I believe, has actually asked the inquiry, all the politicians to look at, is increasing the enfranchisement of more voters. One of the things they've suggested is that foreigners be given the right to vote in Australian elections. I kid you not. I kid you not. You're going to find this hard to believe, but they actually have asked the Senate inquiry, or this joint inquiry of both houses of Parliament, to look at ways in which New Zealand citizens residing in Australia can actually be given the vote, and to look at ways that non-citizens, permanent residents in Australia, can be given the vote. Now, there would be, quite frankly, I don't know there'd be any other country on the face of planet Earth that would do that. And to me, I smell a rat. This is some politically motivated push that probably, goes down to base politics, where they think that, well, these people probably are more inclined to vote Labor, so let's see if we can give them the vote. If that's the case, that's absolutely treacherous.
I think that's exactly what America is doing. The Democrats, certainly, they're fighting these voter ID laws, and people are voting. Their entire intention is to allow illegal immigrants, undocumented residents of America, to participate in the elections. Isn't that already happening in America, and something they're trying to root out?
Yeah, it's a big problem there, where there's a lot of accusations of things going on with big states like California about how tightly do they actually watch over who is actually voting, and whether or not it's actual citizens or just residents as well as citizens. This is just a logical extension of the idea that a lot of politicians have today, that they don't serve the people, but the people serve them, and they want to create the electorate which best suits their vested interest to keep power.
Yep.
And so, I mean, what better way to do it than just bring in the voters that you want? I mean, bring in people who actually owe you a lot for having given them the chance to be a part of the electorate, be a part of the country. I mean, it is. This might be a little bit controversial, but I personally think people should not be able to become citizens for a couple of generations until they've enculturated into Australian society. And that idea comes from.
I want you to hold that thought.
Okay.
Because I want you to be able to say it without censorship.
Okay.
So what we're going to do right now is we're going to end this recording. If you're watching on the live stream, don't go anywhere, don't change the dial, don't go away. We're going to continue the full show with this comment now, but we're going to stop the recording here. If you're watching the recording after the live stream, please go to goodsource.news and watch this full episode, where it will be uncensored, completely uncensored. But after the live stream is finished, we're going to delete the recording of it from Facebook and YouTube, so that we can allow Matt and George and myself to speak without fear of Facebook, YouTube, and other Silicon Valley big tech censors and fascists. We want to have that freedom to have this honest conversation with you. Matt, that's a great concept of it's a huge concept. It's paradigm breaking for us in multicultural modern Western societies, that somebody might not be allowed to become a citizen just because they want to, and to make them a much higher bar of threshold before they can become citizens. Explain that more.
Yeah, well, the idea is, I didn't originate it. It actually comes from the Old Testament. It was part of the law of Israel, where God wanted people coming into the nation of Israel from certain tribes to spend a fair degree of time in Israel, learning the customs of the nation before they... Sorry.
Just knocking your coffee over.
Learning the custom of the nation before they could actually come out. Because some people come from places which are very different. And the way of doing things is very different. And that can cause friction. That can cause issues in the society. And so if you incentivize people, if they want to become a part of your society, they don't just have to come here for a few years and then buy a citizenship and pass a test. If you incentivize them and making sure that they actually have to do more than that, they have to place down roots, they have to learn what it means to be an Australian, they have to learn what Australian traditions are, they have to learn why we have these traditions. It provides a guardian rail to ensure that your nation stays on a much more stable course. Whereas what we see now is large numbers of people come in, and as George has pointed out, polls show that Australians are against this. Even the children of immigrants are against it. I am the child of an immigrant on one side, and the child of an Aussie on the other side. Because you bring in too many people, it puts all sorts of different pressures on the society. Yeah. Cost of living pressures, cost of housing pressures, wage pressures, all these different pressures. So what we want to do is we want to incentivize making it a lot harder to become an Australian, because it's actually something which is of great value, and we want to protect it. We don't want to just treat it like a commodity to be traded. We want to treat it as something to be honored and treasured. And so that's basically the thoughts behind such an idea.
Yep. George?
I completely agree. Nothing further to add, Dave.
Yeah, right. Look, let me throw something into the conversation. And you might have misspoken. Maybe you completely agree with what I'm going to say, or we can have an argument about it. But originally in what you were saying this lady, this German politician who said she's going to ignore the people. You said she's there to do what the people want her to do. Words to that effect. And there's a subtle difference there that you said it right so many times, that she's there to represent the people and serve the people. But what I don't think democracy is doing what's always the most popular, because sometimes what's the most popular is profoundly wrong and a complete fraud and corruption. And there's so many, and you will know as a historian, there's so many times in history where the popular consensus and the extant legislation has been completely immoral.
Yeah, so if you're going to argue, is democracy the best way to do things, then I could point out, well, actually, I have some very big criticisms of democracy.
It depends how you define democracy, because if it's always doing what's the most popular thing to do, then we might as well just have an internet poll on every single piece of legislation. But I actually think what we should be doing is democratically, popularly electing leaders who then lead.
Yeah, so representative democracy. So
I'm not going to consult. If I think, and I'll take Ukraine out of it, I was going to use it, but if I think gizmo widgets are the right policy for us to produce, I'm going to listen, and I'm going to consult, I'm going to research, I'm going to take advice, and then I'm going to do what's right.
Yes, yeah, you're right.
Even if I'm unpopular.
Yep.
And if I lose the next election, that's where the people get their say.
Yes.
And that's, I think, democracy working well. What I hate is politicians who only do what's popular at the cost of what's right.
Yeah, no. Yeah, you are right. I don't disagree with anything you've just said, and I also don't agree that the electorate is the best source of morality or truth.
Right.
Majority does not make
a lot of Australians think that the politici's job is to do what the majority of their electorate wants them to do.
Yeah, well,
I think that's wrong.
A good example of this is a Christian politician. You had no right to vote yes for same-sex marriage. I'll just say that.
Agreed.
You cannot just reject your faith. You have to put Lord before everything else. And when I say Lord, I mean the Lord Jesus Christ, by the way. You have to put him before everything else. You actually have to do what is right. Whereas some Christian politicians rationalize that actually, no, I represent the electorate, and as a Christian, my best thing to do is what they say. Well, no, I don't agree with that. So I agree with you totally. That
Can I add there that I actually think it's not just a Christian's duty, but it's every politician's duty to do what God wants.
Yes.
And this is baked into our constitution and our history and our system of government. All of our police, army, and politicians swear an oath of allegiance and loyalty to the Queen or the King, our sovereign. And when they are crowned, at their coronation, they hold in their left hand the sovereign's orb, which is a golden sphere with on the top of it a cross. And the cross on top of the golden sphere is to remind the sovereign that they are not king of the world, that there is a king of kings that they submit to and that they are accountable to, and that they are humbled before in the authority of. And so when our prime minister, politicians, police and soldiers all swear an oath of allegiance to our sovereign, they are in turn submitting to someone who is submitted. And so it's a fraud on the people for a politician to vote in favour of redefining marriage or undefining marriage, because it is defying the will of the King of Kings expressly communicated.
I think that's very well said.
But certainly for a Christian, even more so.
Yeah, well, it's incumbent on the Christian to know that at a higher level than it is on the non-Christian politician. But it is, I mean, if you read the Constitution, it says by the power of Almighty God or something.
Humbly relying on the blessing of Almighty God.
That's correct. That's what it says.
These states resolve to,
But what I mean is, so when I was saying that, what I was referring to the fact is it's a politician's job to represent their nation and their nation's interests, not another nation's interests. And so what I mean is when the people are saying, excuse me, you're supposed to be serving us, not the people of Ukraine or the people of anywhere else, they're right 100% of the time. I'm actually a big opponent of foreign aid for this reason. I'm a big proponent of
all foreign aid.
Well, I wouldn't put a full lock on it, because there might be a situation where you could send your military in to, say, help a country out in a time of natural disaster. So to me, that seems like a godly use of national resources. So like when the tsunami, like a big world event, like, the 2004 tsunami hit multiple nations, and we send some of our, our military personnel as peaceful servants to help, I think that's a godly use of it. But giving money to other nations, it's just irresponsible. And it often ends up in very corrupt places. I mean, 30%, one statistic I heard from the war in Ukraine is at one point, 30% of the money which had been sent to Ukraine actually went to the soldiers on the ground. The rest just disappeared. Where did it go? Who knows? But that's what happens to a lot of foreign aid. But what politicians should be doing is serving their people, not foreign peoples. And when your people are saying we can't afford to pay our electrical bills, we can't afford to heat our house, I mean, the response is not, we're going to put you in jail for trying to heat your family, as they've done in Switzerland. The response is, we're sorry, we will stop doing this because it's hurting you. I mean, that's just common sense.
This is the big dichotomy of our times politically, whether or not we should put our nations first, the whole America First movement over in the United States that we saw epitomized in Donald Trump, versus those who think that is a bad thing, that is some far right extremist ideology. And quite frankly, it doesn't take an academic, it doesn't take some political science with a whole heap of steep learning in classical political theory to understand what Donald Trump articulated as something that would be quite right and would lead to probably world peace. And that is, if every world leader, if every national leader, I should say, looked after their citizens, put their own country first. And that's what their focus was on, not on what another nation was doing or another nation's problems or problems that their nation might have with another nation, but focused on their own people and putting their country first, then the world would probably be a much, much better place.
Amen. Exactly right. And what you said is so spot on. It would probably lead to world peace. This is the thing people don't understand. A lot of the problems we have in our world come down to the fact that so many governments are trying to interfere with each other and other governments are responding. That's a big part of the problem in the world. And
it goes to what Jimmy Dore said in that clip, you know, who's she doing the bidding of? But she's not doing the bidding of Ukraine. She's doing the bidding, inadvertently, directly or indirectly, of the military-industrial complex. That's who's making the money out of that.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Let's have a chat about the monarchy. We've alluded to. I certainly brought it in the previous conversation of government and democracy and the right way that we should be voting on issues, not following not blindly following the will of the people. Certainly regarding it, but ruling as one submitted to the King of Kings. But we've just seen in this last week the prayers answered of a generation of people. God save the Queen, long live the Queen. And God very much answered that question and gave her a very long reign and a very long life. And she was certainly somebody who personally confessed Jesus as her personal Lord and Saviour. I know that privately, and she confessed that publicly. I didn't meet her privately, but I know I've heard that from people who know her privately. And that's a good thing. But it now really raises into the front of mind for the whole world, and certainly the Commonwealth and Australia in particular, the relevance, the benefits and the purpose of the Queen of England, the King of England, the Crown of England in our Constitution and rule of law and future. We see the Greens have already radically hijacked this period of mourning and coronation to further their own godless globalist agendas and push for a republic. So I guess quick straw poll. Matt, you told me just before the show you're a monarchist. You support the monarchy. George, monarchy or republic for Australia's future?
Well, you tell me the kind of republic that we're going to have, and then I'll tell you what my thoughts are. I mean, that's it really is dumb to say, do you support, I'm sorry, I don't say you're dumb, but it's a dumb question that they try and load the public up with when they say, do you support the monarchy, by which they mean the current system of government that we have, or do you support a republic, which is just something else? Well, what is the something else? You can't just write a blank check when you're talking about the makeup of your government. So I would support a republic under very, very limited means, David, and it's got nothing to do with the monarchy. I can tell you what it's got to do with. It's got to do with the power of the people. And so if you developed a system that had much better checks and balances, that completely separated the executive from the legislature, and then on top of that, if you're instilling, which ultimately you're going to, if you're going to set up a president, an individual head of state that has all the power here in this country, theoretically at least all the power, then you're going to have a way to remove him or her. And the way to remove him or her would be through the right of recall. And so I think that, as long as there was clearly defined checks and balances in a system, that we got to directly elect the head of state, and then on top of that direct election of head of state, there was a voter's right of recall so that we could trounce this fella or woman, I would consider voting for it. I'd probably be much more inclined to consider voting for it under the reign of Charles III. But I've got to tell you that it's not the kind of republic that the proponents of republicanism in Australia want. They want a republic which is just going to do, it's going to be there for the elites. You know, the politicians ultimately will pick the head of state. It will be some, some glorified elitist who likes to swan about and be a Chardonnay socialist and give all the platitudes that they normally do. They're not going to want a republic for the people.
Yeah.
I'm going to push back against that, George. When I say I'm a monarchist, I'm saying there's no form of republic that would ever convince me to change. And there's no form of republic in the world that's ever been stable for as long as our constitutional monarchy. I mean, the Australian monarchy, our constitutional system goes back at least about 1,000 years. You can go back to William the Conqueror, who defeated the Anglo-Saxon kings. If you want to go back before William the Conqueror, because he was claiming what he believed was his right to the throne of England, you can actually take it back into the Anglo-Saxon period. It's a form of government which has lasted in a way which no republic ever has. Probably the most successful republic in history would be the Roman Republic, and we all know how that ended up as a banana republic. We call it the Roman Empire, but it was just one big banana republic. That's what it was. I mean, in every other republic,
where the president, the person with the ultimate power at the head of that republic, was deified, and it turned into a religion, and the confession was Caesar is Lord.
Exactly.
And it was punishable by death if you didn't attribute not just all power to him, but all divine authority.
Yeah, I mean, France is on their fifth republic. That's how unstable their system is.
Yeah.
They're in the fifth republic. I mean, people will point, and people who disagree with me on this always bring up, well, what about America, Matt? America is a strong beacon of democracy in the world today. And if you can say that with a straight face, then you're not paying attention, because the fact that the Democrats have used the law system to go after a former president is all the signs America is going down the same banana republic route. And so, look, I understand what you're saying, George. You make a good point. What am I rejecting is the question you're asking. What am I asking to choose or reject? One of the big points you make, and I think you're spot on 100%, is we can't trust these elites that we have today to set up a good system.
Correct.
So why would we break something which works better than any other system and think that the guys in charge today, the men and the women in charge today, could come up with anything even close to as good? When the system you described, one with an honourable head of state, which keeps in place some respect with some proper checks and balances. There's a name for that. It's called the constitutional monarchy. I
disagree with that, Mass. And that's not to argue. Look, I don't want to be stuck in the Republican camp here in this debate, because I'm not. I mean, I've articulated a vision of a republic that I may support. I didn't say I would support. You know, you'd have to always look at the finer details. But the point is that whatever's presented would have to be better than the current system. And the current system is good compared to the rest. But that's not to say it's good full stop. As someone served as a member of parliament in that current system, I'm going to say there is a terrible way that we do government, a terrible way that we do government, where we have the executive intertwined with the legislature. And so the House of Representatives is anything actually but. The House of Representatives should actually just be called the House of Government, because that's all it's been devolved to. You have political party strictures, and political parties, I'm going to say, in Australia have probably bastardised the way that the founding fathers of this nation envisaged it would go. But nonetheless, that's the system we have today, where party strictures really have a stranglehold over the idea of true representation. And I don't know that there's any fixing that. I really don't. So that's why I say, and look, so my argument about the separation of the executive and the legislature perhaps even might be separate to the idea of, do we need an Australian head of state, or we have an Australian head of state. The Queen is the Queen of Australia, or the King is the King of Australia technically. So do we need a president or whatever title you're going to give them, or could we do this under a monarchical system? We perhaps could do it under a monarchical system. To me, there is one thing that I would say about the monarchy. There is a sense, if you're looking at it like this, and I think that this is how you should rightly view the monarchy in the constitutional monarchy framework. The crown, which is ultimately what the king or queen of the time is, the crown. Like that is an institution, the crown. And the crown represents sovereignty. So what is sovereignty? Sovereignty is the will of the people. So the crown is the representation in a single person of the combined will of the people of the nation. And so that's why ultimate authority rests in that institution. If the king or queen at any point in time decided that, no, this is just not happening, whether it's a representative government, an elected government, or a judiciary or whatever, realistically, they probably have the authority to walk in and just say, no, this is not happening.
But that's not true.
This.
That's not true, George.
No, David,
let me pull up with the actual point of error you made, with the greatest respect. That's the crown is not our head of state. The Governor General is our head of state. The crown has the authority vested in it, which is exercised by the Governor General, but the crown itself has no constitutional or legal authority in Australia whatsoever. They don't have any authority to appoint the Governor General. They don't have any authority to sack the Governor General. They don't have any authority to direct, advise, or counsel gratuitously the Governor General.
The British Parliament.
I think you're mixing up. I think you're mixing up convention with actually the wording of the Constitution.
No, that's the Constitution. If
the king wanted to appoint himself Governor General of Australia, it'll happen. Trust me. That's the way our system is. You might think differently, but what you're thinking of is convention rather than reality.
Well, it's not just convention. The British Parliament actually passed an act giving us more power here in Australia, but they could reverse that. So it's a bit of both. But I don't think...
The reality is, if they tried to do that, they would need to come with an army.
Exactly. It would cause a civil war, which is why they don't try to do it. I don't actually see sovereignty as representing the will of the people. I think, and maybe you make a good point in saying that is part of a democratic...
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting definition of sovereignty.
To me, sovereignty represents the authority vested in the institution itself. The sovereign has the authority, whether the people want them to or not. Now, a wise sovereign uses their authority for the good of their people, as opposed to that politician we looked at before, who's not a sovereign, but has some authority. But I agree with you completely about the critiques of our system, George, and I also submit that you understand them much better than I do from the inside. I totally get that. But I would argue that what's happened, and maybe you can give some better insight on this, I would argue what's happened is that the political parties have corrupted and co-opted the system, and they're not part of the system. And this is something a lot of Australians aren't aware of, is that political parties are not part of the Constitution. They're not part of the legal structure of our society.
They're a convention.
They are corporations which have, or conventions, or just groups of people which have decided we're going to protect our power.
And they are corporations.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Absolutely incorporated. The parties, they're proprietary limiteds.
Exactly. So these are artificial bodies which have co-opted. And if you study the history of the British Parliament, I mean, one of the most powerful movements in the British Parliament were the Whigs. Do you guys know about the Whig Party?
Name rings a bell, but I couldn't define it and explain them.
Exactly, because they're long gone. Because this is what happens in parliaments. There are parties which can hold power for some time, and then they're lost to history. I mean, what was the name of the party which the Republican Party replaced? I can't even remember the name of it, but that serves the point in America.
Yeah.
I think it might have had a similar name, but I believe it was what's his name? Abraham Lincoln, who created the Republican Party.
And nobody would have known who the United Australia Party was. Well, few people would have known who the UAP was prior to Clive Palmer reinventing it.
Yeah, so I agree with you. Your critiques of the system come with a deep knowledge, and I grant that, George, and respect that. And I agree with you on those. I just don't think. I think your point is a fair point, actually. where you say if they offered us a better system, you would consider it. That is a fair point, because
I actually like that position, because the accusation of conservatives is that we refuse to change anything ever. And I think the authentic position of a conservative is somebody who is prepared to progress and move forward, but it has to be a demonstrated need with a good reason at a sober pace. Would you agree with that, George?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's
Matt,
not
you were
just
going to finish your
throwing
thought before I interrupted.
traditions
Oh
for the
no,
sake of it.
basically, I don't disagree. I also think, to add to that, they also have to be willing to go backwards and recognize just because we've moved ahead, we haven't progressed. A lot of movement forward is actually regression, and that's like the
Exactly.
redefining marriage was not progression; it's regression.
It was undefining marriage.
Sorry to be a smarty pants here, Dave, but I've just gone to the rule book. So, Chapter
Do it,
2
George.
of the
Embarrass
Constitution,
me.
the executive government, Section 61, executive power, and this sums it up. The executive power of the Commonwealth is vested in the Queen, well, now the King, and is exercisable by the Governor-General as the Queen's representative, and extends to the execution and maintenance of this Constitution and of the laws of the Commonwealth.
But the key word there is exercisable.
Yes, exercisable by the Governor-General as the
power.
Queen's representative. So if the Queen said, or the King now, that
But
I'm
only
appointing
as the
myself the
representative,
Governor-General,
not
I'm
the moral
appointing myself the
representative.
So there was a time and place where actually now King Charles was being touted by the royal family as a future Governor-General of Australia. Now there was pushback, as I understand at the time, to that idea, and it never happened. I think during the early 80s.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
have we ever had a foreign GG?
Yeah, of course. Actually, no. Since founding, maybe not. I guess
Since Federation.
Yeah. Since
yes,
Federation.
no. Well, there have been a lot of foreign Governor Generals. I think the first Australian Governor General, I would need to go back and check, but it wasn't until about the 50s or 40s or something like that we had.
Are you serious? That's interesting.
Yes.
Very good.
There were plenty, obviously, before Federation.
Yeah, very much. Look, we're just talking about, I guess, the definition of conservative and George's willingness to consider a better form of government. And I, too, would consider a renovation of the Constitution. My fear would be the people who would control the levers of such constitutions and referenda today would be corrupt people and would only lead us backwards. But I don't think the monarchy would be a part of it that needs changing and has any inherent problems with it. I think we should multiply the number of states we have and decentralize power as much more as we can. I like George's suggestion, and David Flint seconds this, that we should have the right of recall, not just for our head of state or even for our executive, but I think every elected official should be able to be recalled to an election under sufficient popular triggers. And there's other ways that we need to renovate. And in some ways, the renovations that need to happen are a restoration back to what the Founding Fathers first envisioned for us, which was much more federalistic and decentralized than the current abomination of things invented by premiers and high court decisions over the last century or so.
They were much. The way the system was originally set up, the federal government had far less power because people were supposed to be representing their local electorates from where they were from, and uniting everybody around, taking money off everybody to fulfill the national vision was a lot harder because everyone had different visions, and so stuff had to be done locally, had to be raised locally, had to invest locally. Whereas what the political parties have been able to do is basically create power blocks, which allow them to direct our nation according to their will. And I would argue that the difference between the two sides has really just dropped down completely in the last decade. They're just very similar, almost having the same vision. I mean, even the Conservative government, who won multiple elections against climate change politics, has agreed before the last election to go to 2050. Barnaby Joyce, who promised he would never agree. Am I correct in saying that? Actually, I want to just ask that. Am I correct that he said he would never support a what was it, a
climate tax?
Yeah, pretty much. I think he like most politicians, he always gave himself a little bit of an asterisk to the side, but pretty much said that he wouldn't support it, and then did.
Yeah.
So I mean, our system does have issues. One thing I would love to see is politicians being accountable for the money they spend. Like, and when I say accountable, I don't just mean at an election. I mean, if you get your people in serious sovereign debt, you are held accountable to that, just like a business leader is held accountable.
Yeah, I think national debt is a major. Yeah. Let's talk more about
Dave. Just jump in with another little fact check here. Yes, the first Australian Governor General was Lord Richard Casey, appointed to the office in 1965, and before that, Australia had 15 Governor Generals that were all British, and mostly peers. A lot of
who appointed those 15? Australian Parliament or the Queen?
The Queen.
When did Australian parliaments or prime ministers start appointing governor generals, and is that convention or legislation?
I think it's convention, and I think that in just about all of those cases, obviously, Buckingham Palace would have consulted with the Australian Prime Minister at the time. I think that what has happened in practice is that it's flipped from being nominations that Buckingham Palace has sent across to nominations perhaps that the Lodge has sent across to Buckingham Palace that are now being accepted. So that's been the change in how these appointments have happened.
And here's the value for me in the monarchy, and it is the powers reserved. It's the power that Malcolm Turnbull never got. It's the power that Anthony Albanese will never get. It's the power that Kevin Rudd never got. In the reservation of those powers, it's that final 0.1%. Now, a lot of people will argue on social media these silly things like, why doesn't the Governor General or the governor in a state intervene and stop this corruption? Well, because it's not their power to. They only have the Crown's vested power to exercise, and that is in constitutional crises, not in political interventions. And so in the case that the government and the Prime Minister in particular is basically not able to pay for the policies and the running of Australia, they're able to force an election when we need an election. And we've seen that done very successfully once. And Gough Whitlam was filthy dirty at John Kerr and called all kinds of fire and brimstone down on him. But the following two elections where Gough Whitlam stood for election, the people of Australia said, no, the Governor General got it right, and we don't want you as our PM anymore. That emergency brake should never be used and should never be necessary, because we should expect better from our politicians. That it has been needed once in the last century proves the need for it, not the case that it's a bad thing. The fact that it was used means that kind of emergency brake is very, very good to stop absolute power, which corrupts absolutely. It's the reserved powers of the Governor General which I think make our constitution better than the American system.
I think it's actually been needed a few more times than just.
You're probably right.
And I do think they have more power than you say. I think a lot of what's happened is precedent convention and just falling into a pattern of not using that power. But I mean, for example, during the last couple of years, I was talking to a politician and he said one of the reasons why certain people are not doing more things is they simply don't want to create a constitutional crisis. Well, when everybody's rights are being abrogated, I can't think of a better situation to cause a constitutional crisis.
Well, somebody just said that. Jan McDonald said that. And I mean, it's a tragedy, but it's not technically a constitutional crisis. It's the kind of thing that the High Court should solve when there's a violation of the Constitution.
But when none of that's working, I agree with your point. There's a final check.
Well, and again, let's renovate the Constitution and fix it. It's not the Governor-General's job because it's political. What we need to do here is have the right of recall. But the reality is that if sovereignty is the will of the people, we just had an election, a general election across the nation, and abuse of the Constitution, abuse of natural law freedoms, abuse of God-given rights and responsibilities was popularly supported by Australia. And Victorians in a couple of months will once again vote with Stockholm Syndrome. And they will vote for their abuser and their captor and their dictator. And popularly, the lack of a viable alternative will return a dictator to power, despite his most flagrant abuse of their rights and constitution.
You don't think the federal election was in part a rejection of the constitutional abuses which happened? I mean, I think a lot of conservative voters
I do, but the Governor-General would be foolish to overrule the High Court, which ruled on those. I mean, the people took the government and said, "Hey, you're breaking constitution. Right of intercourse between states and right to leave my nation if I want to." There were some great actions brought, and the High Court fraudulently ruled against them. So a Governor-General defying a full bench of the High Court about a constitutional matter he'd be brave, but he'd also be a fool.
You could look over to the UK example where Boris Johnson attempted to prorogue Parliament, and he got the Queen to actually prorogue the Parliament, and then their Supreme Court over in the UK ruled against the Queen. Now, I thought that's a turn up for the books.
Wow!
The Queen just turned around and said, "Well, they ruled that her decree was invalid, and they probably did it with the politest of reasons, and I think that all the blame was obviously put on Boris for providing incorrect advice to the Crown." So, the Queen could have at that point in time said, "Well, I don't accept that judgment, and I'm disbanding the Supreme Court, or I'm relieving my justices of their tenure, or something like that, and setting aside their judgment." But she didn't. Yep. So, if it doesn't happen even in those cases, then it's very unlikely to happen, which is good. At the same time, it's a shame, because this is, there needs, if an institution such as the Crown, embodied in a single person, is able to wield theoretically so much power, but never ever does, then what happens is that politicians who could become tyrants
are emboldened.
Catch on to that fact that it's never going to be wielded, it's never ever going to happen. They're not going to do anything. And so they can go about their merry way. Now, it didn't happen in the case of Gough Whitlam, and that was probably a wake-up call to all future Australian prime ministers that, this same situation could happen to me. I actually don't have all the authority, someone can sack me.
Correct. It's a very healthy bloodletting.
I think that system is good. There's something that must be unnerving for any tyrannical prime minister, and this is the UK I'm talking about here, and there must be something very empowering to the people to know that every prime minister that wants to lord it over the public had to go, from Winston Churchill on, had to go and sit down like the kid called to the school mistress and explain themselves to this little old woman as to what the hell their laws were about and what the hell their agenda was about. I kind of like that fact.
George, do you think that King Charles III is going to be worse for Australia in any material way than his mother, Queen Elizabeth II?
Look, I think that unfortunately, because of, I'm going to set aside all of the, personal stuff, but that's known. The Princess Diana, Camilla Parker Bowles, now the Queen Consort, all of that stuff makes interesting tabloid reading and New Idea and Women's Weekly reading, but it really does nothing for the nation. but it's left a bad taste in probably a lot of people's mouth about King Charles. And I think that on the conservative side of the ledger, his strong support for the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset agenda and all the climate alarmism, I mean, he is well and truly in deep with all of that, And so that's probably left a bad taste in the mouth of many conservatives. So unfortunately for the institution of the Crown, its embodiment in the person at this point in time is not really great for it. And I think that that probably gives the Republican movement a bit of a fillip, that they probably have a bit of a wind in their sails, and they will have under this this current king. So that's, if you ask me, is it going to be good or bad for Australia? Well, watch the movement towards a republic over the next decade. I think that will grow legs again in Australia, and it's because of Charles's probably his unlikability and the fact that he's meddled in political affairs as well.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Matt, I just want to ask you a question. I've got the picture of Queen Elizabeth on my wall. You can't see it on the set right now, but if the camera is pointing a little bit more that way and a little bit higher, you can see the Queen Elizabeth. And I'm very grateful to Senator Erica Betts for sending it to me so that I could put it up. Gratefully received. Now, I'm, like George said, I've got some personal grudges against King Charles III. I don't like some of his politics and his ideas and philosophies. And I've seen on Facebook and even some people in comments today have said, I serve the King of Kings only. I vote for him. Not that he needs our vote, but I just won't give any affection or honor to any other king whatsoever, especially somebody corrupt of personality and perhaps soul like our new sovereign. What's the, we've heard lots of people abusing Romans 13 and other such scriptures about honoring the king and the authority. What's the right balance here? Scripturally, if we're going to say that we obey the King of Kings, what does he say about obeying and honoring Charles and our allegiance to him?
Oh, yeah. So we should pray for the king, pray for all. In fact, let me read it to you. I'll open it up if I can get it here quickly. Let me read this. This is something for Christians to read. Look at this. This is 1 Timothy chapter 2. First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. In fact, I'm going to be preaching on that in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to look at the tension between when do we have to say no to certain laws and things in society, but why we have to be good citizens in general. It's a very important Christian principle. But the king is the king. You don't get to say, not my king. He's the king.
Right.
You don't get to choose the king. That's how it works. And look, you can look at all the mistakes this king has made. Prince Charles will not be the first, or King Charles, I should say. He is the king now. King Charles will not be the first king who's got a bit of a checkered past. In fact, I think you'll find it hard to find kings who don't. Those who are Anglicans who are watching, if you have an issue with King Charles, I'll just remind you of King Henry VIII. I mean, he made King Charles look a bit like a choir boy in the way that he acted. In fact, I would say not just a bit, quite like a choir boy. King Charles. So the whole point of the monarchy is not about always the character of the king. Now, I want to qualify that and say I actually do believe it's important for the king to be of high quality and of high character. I don't think the Queen Elizabeth's reign was perfect, but what you cannot say about her is that she wasn't a person of dignity who comported herself that way. And she did. She was a rock of dignity to the whole world. And everyone who saw her reign thinks that of her. And many people love her just for that, the way that she held herself with dignity. But the point of a monarchy is not how much you like the king. It's about the enduring sovereignty which is held within that office,
institution,
and the authority that has, or institution, and the authority that institution has to have influence in direct society. And I'm interested to see how King Charles goes. He's 71, I believe. He's not the young man who made those mistakes. He's a very different man. I don't agree with some of his politics. I think George makes some good, credible points about the concerns about the World Economic Forum and those globalist agendas. But a lot of people might not know this. The British Commonwealth is the original globalist agenda. I mean, the British monarchy has strongly been behind globalist trends for a long time now. In fact, which empire was it that they say that the sun never set on it?
The British Empire,
which was a globalist empire. I mean, the impact of the British monarchy on globalist trends goes way back, way earlier than Prince or King Charles. It goes way back into the 19th century. You can even go further than that. Yeah. And so there's nothing new about this. I think the imperfections of our monarch are not a reason to get rid of the monarch. And as I said, there's no Republican system that you could offer to me that I would replace our constitutional monarchy for. However, if you do manage to come up with a better system, I'll look at it. Because I'd be very fascinated to see if that's possible.
George,
I agree. There's got to be a separation between almost the individual and the institution. There's been a couple of, I mean, I don't know, Dave, if you can bring up a couple of comments that some of the viewers have made, but Jan McDonald, a little short while ago, wrote, "We the people are even more frightened now Charles is on the throne." And then Shane Earhart has just put up a comment saying he's got no trust in the WEF wingnut, just as he has no trust in the WEF-controlled political grubs that have infested our parliaments. Now, but that says it all, right? You know, you could go from a Davos man as our king to a Davos man as our president, who no doubt will be directly elected. They will have a direct. I don't think the Australian people will accept anything other than a directly elected president. There'll be all sort of ways that if we ever become a republic, there'll be all sorts of ways that they try and pigeonhole and wrap that president up in sort of strictures. But at the end of the day, if it's going to be a directly elected president, he's going to have more power than any other politician in this country has ever had, including any prime minister.
Yeah.
And I much prefer a WF wingnut in an institution like the monarchy, where, you know, quite frankly, they don't do anything. As I just said before, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom ruled that they'd made a mistake, and they could have reacted to that, and they didn't. So they're not going to ever react. Versus, I guess, a president where it might go to their head, and you could suddenly have a foreign agenda being played out in our very country from the head of state. Now, I'm not sure that that's something that I would like to see for this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been great having you both on the show today. Appreciate this discussion and debate and exploring the differences that we have. Matt, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem.
You can buy Matt's book, co-written with Tim Grant, at defendingconscience.com. And George, I really appreciate your contributions and experience and insights, as always. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Matt. You
can follow George and become a subscriber and supporter of his at nationfirst.substack.com. CPAC is coming up 1st to 2nd of October. I'd love to see you there. If you'd like to use a discount code, get 10% off your ticket, use the code GOODSAUCE with no space, Good Sauce. And of course, head to churchandstate.com.au for details of upcoming conferences. 5th of November in Adelaide, a Saturday afternoon and evening with a huge lineup of speakers, including the indefatigable Senator Alex Antic, as well as the 3rd to 4th of March next year in Brisbane. Those tickets are now on sale, and there's a great option for one of the fundraiser dinners after the conference as well. So those details at churchandstate.com.au. We can do this better because you support us. The lights, the sound, the volunteers, Everybody gets their tools and energy to go forward because of the support that you guys give us. You can go to goodsource.news and subscribe to the newsletters there, or my particular personal newsletter, which is davepellowe.com, for my articles, writings, and interviews. And of course, we'd love you to put your hand in your pocket. If you can't speak up for fear of losing your job, then help send other people into the media and marketplace where you would like to go to say the things you want to say. Become a monthly or one-off supporter there anytime you can, at nationfirst.substack.com or goodsource.news or davepellowe.com or churchandstate.com.au. And of course, whoever you're enjoying content from, can I please suggest that they should be kept around by being supported financially. And in the meantime, you can certainly share and spread these videos. I promise you, my reach on Facebook has been decimated by more than 90% over the last month. And Facebook has smacked me over the knuckles for saying Hitler was a fascist, and that's very bad. It's a stupid thing to get a strike for. And they've I guess fascists have to stick together. So I really appreciate your support in just sharing this video. If you've watching still an hour later, you're the kind of person who finds value in this. I hope you know people who would as well. So please share this video. That is it for this episode of Pellowe Talk. I've been showing this outro video for a long time because I love her. I love her spirit. I love her wisdom. And we're going to miss her a lot. Good night.
Today, we need a special kind of courage. Not the kind needed in battle, but a kind which makes us stand up for everything that we know is right, everything that is true and honest. We need the kind of courage that can withstand the subtle corruption of the cynics, so that we can show the world that we are not afraid of the future.